This is the Elite Sport Mentality Podcast with me, Tom Evans. Welcome to the Elite Sport Mentality Podcast, where we'll be exploring all things sports psychology. Whether you're an athlete, coach, or sports enthusiast, this podcast is your go-to resource for understanding the mental side to sports performance. Each episode, I'll be talking to someone from the world of sport or sports psychology to get their insights into the mental side of their sport. We'll delve into the latest research, share inspiring stories from top athletes, and provide practical tips to you to enhance your mental skills. Join me as I look to unlock the secrets to an elite sport mentality. Let's go. Okay. And welcome to the Elite Sport Mentality Podcast with me, Tom Evans. I'm the performance sports psychologist for Loughborough College. And today I'm joined by Ian Wood, who's a long-term friend, but also an S&C strength and conditioning coach for over 12 years. So welcome, Ian.
Cool. Thanks for having me on.
No worries. So obviously it's a sports psychology podcast, so it might seem sort of a bit rogue to get a S&C coach on, but the reason around the thinking around it is sports psychology is defined as the performance, but also the participation of sport activity and sport in general. So Ian does some amazing work around that and increasing physical activity levels through his different platforms. So that was sort of the reasoning behind it, Ian. So thanks again for coming on. But first question I ask the guests is, can you just talk me through sort of your sporting journey and as an athlete when you're at uni, but also then in the field of S&C coaching?
Yeah, sure. So Tom and I grew up in Leicester, and I kind of went to uni in Bournemouth. So kind of 18, left town, went down south, and I did a sports development and coaching degree. Because I always knew that I wanted to get into this kind of sort of field. And the reason I chose Bournemouth is because I didn't get into my first choice, which was Bath. So I had to go with my second choice. But they had quite a good volleyball program down there. And that's what I was really interested in playing at that point. I've been playing it for a couple of years, had a bit of early success with it, and I just kind of wanted to run with it a little bit. So I ended up going down to Bournemouth, doing my degree down there. It probably wasn't the right degree for me, but I kind of didn't really understand the real differences between the degrees at that point. But it served me really, really well. I played volleyball the whole time through university. When I graduated, I kind of went into the National League. At that point, I eventually got myself up into the top division, which at the time was called Super 8. I think it's called something different these days, and eventually got through to kind of national team sort of stuff and captain GB in an all-star game, which was more of like a Sky Sports get attention to the sport sort of thing rather than an actual general big thing. But that was probably kind of the highest point that I made. But through the whole time of that, I was working full time. There's no money in volleyball, basically. So you have to work alongside it. I ended up running the gym at the university. I ended up doing a master's degree there in sports management at the same time. And then after that, I've gone into kind of private facilities. So when I left Bournemouth University as a staff member, I went into a local S&C gym that was private, and it was probably quite a trendsetter at the time. There wasn't many of them. We're talking about 2010 at this point, 2010, 2012, that sort of time. So there wasn't many of these sorts of gyms around. So I had a really good opportunity to go in, be a head coach through that sort of period. That kind of helped introduce me to quite a lot of elite athletes through that environment. And since I've left there, kind of in the last 3 or 4 years, I've just been fully self-employed, working with kind of regular people and a few athletes still on the side.
Yeah, nice. So when you spoke about that degree that maybe wasn't the right choice for you at the time, what was that degree? What do you think would have been a better option? Like, how do you, thinking of the athletes that listen to this, all 16 to 18, thinking about that next step, thinking about where they might go to uni and what they might do, how could have maybe been guided a bit better through that, do you think?
Yeah, for me, it was kind of understanding the differences in the terminology. And I don't feel like when I was making that decision, I'd really either personally engaged with what information was out there, because 16-year-old, it's quite a lot to think about, and also being guided through that process a little bit. I don't really remember having people to kind of guide me through and kind of ask questions about why I was choosing XYZ. So I did sports development and coaching, and I probably put a lot of weight on the coaching side of things, and I probably should have paid attention to the development side of things, and that's very at the time that was very kind of financial based. So national governing bodies, funding, lottery funding, how do these sports operate kind of from the top down, rather than being actually kind of involved in sport itself in terms of whether we're coaching and working with athletes, that sort of thing. Because that's what I knew I wanted to do that, but I didn't really understand the differences. I think at the time, the degree that would have been right for me would have been a sports science or strength and conditioning one, but I don't think there was many strength and conditioning degrees available at that time, because it's a little while now. So one of those two would have been the better option for me.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point you make about just talking to people, like getting that guidance, whether it doesn't have to be a career guidance, like counsellor. Obviously, they're really good, but obviously a lot of the athletes we speak to are going to have coaches, S&C coaches, sports psychologists, nutritionists around them. So just encourage them to ask the questions, I suppose, of how did they get there? What's the best pathway if it looks like something they want to do? And that leads me nicely on to the next question. So obviously you as an S&C coach, the employability aspect of this is how do you get there? So you've done that degree, you've done that master's. Obviously, what after that is the kind of accreditations, memberships, and stuff that you kind of partook in to get to where you are now?
Yeah, so my personal pathway is I started off kind of just doing standard gym qualifications, so gym instructors, personal trainer qualifications. They were kind of built into my university degree. You just had to pay like a little supplement just to do an additional extra couple of units, where a lot of it was already in the degree sort of stuff. So I graduated as a gym instructor, personal trainer. At that point, you kind of got two routes you can go down. If you've got a personal trainer qualification like I had, that's a level 3. And then when you go to level 4, you can do some specializations. So that could be lower back pain, it could be diabetes and weight loss. But one of them now is you can do a level 4 specialism in strength and conditioning. And that's something that I've taught kind of over the last few years as well through a company called Strength and Conditioning Education. So it's just kind of the next layer up from your level 3. But initially, when I was at Bournemouth University working, they had a very generous CPD budget.
Okay.
In my role as the gym manager, I could apply for courses that I wanted to do, and I applied to do the UKSCA accreditation, so UK Strength and Conditioning Association. That's pretty much like the gold standard in this country for strength and conditioning work. If you want to go and work in elite sport with an elite club, they're probably going to want that on your CV. And it kind of consists of multiple workshops. So you'll do a 2-day workshop on weightlifting, on speed and agility, on program design, all these sorts of units. There's 3 or 4 of them. It might change a little bit since I've done it. And then you book into an assessment day. And then ideally you pass. You don't have to do those workshops before you attend the assessment day. You could just book into assessment day if you think you've got the skills to pass, but you'll be best prepared if you do those kind of workshops.
Yeah.
Beforehand. So that was my route. You can either do the level 4 or the UKSCA. The other common one that I know a few people that have done is doing the NSCA, Certified Strength and Conditioning Specialist, which is basically the US version of the UKSCA. It's got a slightly higher pass rate. UKSCA is quite hard to pass. I think it's got a 25% pass rate first time. CSCS is a little bit easier. So some people prefer to take that as a route just to get in and get started and start working with people. But those are the general routes that you could take. And you could do it also as an undergraduate and postgraduate at university and have a lot of that kind of content incorporated in. But they will probably still book you onto a UKSCA assessment day at the end of your course to tick that box as well.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it'll be useful for a lot of people listening, because I know just the conversations I have one-to-ones, like being a personal trainer or being an S&C coach, comes up quite a lot as something that they want to do alongside their sport or what they see themselves going on to afterwards. So them understanding that there are different sort of pathways, and unfortunately it's not always easy. They don't make it easy where it's just one set route. It tends to be a few different routes and then different things you can do. So just getting there overview of that's really good. Then moving back onto kind of sports psychology then. So I remember kind of looking through your Instagram one time, and obviously you're an S&C coach. And I was thinking you're just talking sports psychology, like all the messages that you're kind of putting out there were just sports psych ones that I would be talking to athletes about. I found that really interesting. So what are some of your methods around increasing physical activity in the general population? So a lot of your job, like say you've worked with general population, you've worked with elite athletes. When you're working with the general population, what are some of the key messages, some of the key methods that you use to try and get them in the gym, get them in sport?
It's quite interesting, actually. Maybe sound like a psychologist, and I definitely don't see myself in that way at all. But at the same time, like when you are working with anybody, like in a one-to-one or a group environment, like I'll often say that as a PT, you become a bit of like an agony aunt, or you become somebody's like, essentially psychologist, because they'll tell you so many things as you're going through hours, and then you just get to know people really, really well. But a lot of the people that I work with these days, I call them kind of everyday athletes. So they're people, but they want to be more athletic, either because they were maybe an athlete in the past in their 20s or something, and life's happened and they've had kids and their career's taken off and they're stuck in an office now, and they just want to get back to feeling athletic, or they're just getting a little bit older and they don't like the feeling of slowing down. So that's the kind of person that I'll generally work with. And I guess, there's the stuff I probably talk about the most in kind of my content when I'm trying to attract new clients in is kind of breaking down barriers and just making everything feel a little bit easier. I think, especially when you've, you maybe had some success either in a sport or in your career, and you've got to a certain level, you're used to being good at stuff. You're used to doing well, you're used to knowing what you're doing and having all the answers and people coming to you and asking questions. But then you're starting in something new, going to the gym, and you maybe don't know how to do it. You maybe not confident in it. You go in and it's like, oh, this is the first thing I've felt rubbish at for a long time, because I'm this who knows how to run their life and stuff. So it's trying to make it easier for people to get started. Just take some actions in the right direction, and kind of put this perfectionist kind of mindset to one side. A lot of the people that I work with will be very kind of all or nothing, and if they can't 100% commit to their training, and if they can't 100% commit to their diet, they'll not fully invest, and they'll basically drop out after a few weeks when a couple of inconveniences get in the way. So it's trying to get people out of that, and it's like, right, it's not all or nothing, it's just always something. Always do something that moves yourself forward, and try not to be a perfectionist. And I talk about imperfect actions quite a lot. It's like there's always something you can do. It doesn't have to be the perfect thing, but it's going to move you at least a step forward.
Yeah, that's interesting. I remember listening to on the Dice hockey, one of the Dice hockey camps. So we'll go to Lilleshall and there's a weekend of hockey, where they do like their workshops and one-to-ones and stuff. And they had a preview, I can't remember her name now, a female hockey player who'd been in the Dice program, and she spoke about I'm not sure if it was something she'd stolen or come up with herself, but she spoke about the rule of minimum that she has. So she says when she goes to a gym and she's not really feeling it, or when she has to do a bit of mobility or whatever at home, she has the rule of minimum, which is literally, what is the minimum amount of work I can do today to get away with making it worthwhile going? And then she said what tends to happen is it snowballs, just by the nature of the people, like the athletes that she's working with. They're competitive, they kind of get to the gym, they do the minimum, and they think, well, I may as well kind of stick around and do a bit more like of that exercise, or jump on the treadmill for a bit. And she says it kind of snowballs, and it creates, just getting in there and doing something is better than nothing, and it might turn into something even more. And then that was interesting what you said about being an agony aunt. So I was talking to a physiotherapist on the weekend, and they were like, the best sports psychology now, I think, is kind of understood that it works through other people. So instead of a sports psychologist sitting with someone in home one-to-ones and workshops, it's like, okay, the S&C coach who spends like hours and hours and hours of time with teams and individuals, and the physios with injured players spend all their time in the medical room. So how can we work through the MDT? How can we have those good conversations that are promoting kind of these mental skills and developing sports psychology through the MDT? So talk to me a little bit about how that might differ working with an elite athlete. So you've got the general population, your everyday athletes, as you talk about them, and then how would you then differ your approach with an elite athlete? You've got someone who's sort of in a sport, or maybe recently retired, someone who's kind of a bit of a higher level. What would your approach be with them?
To be honest, like, I don't think there's as much difference as people might think, because at the end of the day, the whole job is just working with people, and people, and for a lot of people, if you are an athlete, your athletic status just replaces your status of having a job. That that's still what pays the bills at the end of the day. And a lot of my thing in terms of my business that I'm building is about training everyday people more like athletes, because I feel like if you walk into any kind of just standard gym and you wanted to work with a personal trainer, you'll probably get presented with either a bodybuilding program or a powerlifting program. And it's either going to be maximum muscle or maximum strength. And I think there's this nice third option that is a bit more training like an athlete in terms of like the physical side of things. But when it comes to the mental side of things and maybe the lifestyle management stuff as well, I don't think the differences are as big as people may think, because in both scenarios, whether you're an athlete or you're an everyday person, the gym is never the main thing. The gym is only the main thing if you are a strength sport athlete, or if you're a bodybuilder. It's not the thing that's paying the bills. It's not the thing that's getting the results at the weekend. So if you're an athlete, you're going to the gym to be better at your sport. And if you're an everyday person, you're going to the gym to be better at your everyday life, to be fitter, have more energy, those sorts of things as well. So as the coach, you're always taking into account these other stresses. And for everyday people, it's probably the stresses are work, family, life responsibilities, those sorts of things. The only physical stresses they're getting are from what I'm doing in the gym. So I'm kind of 100% delivering that side of things. Athletes have it just a little bit different in terms of they have other stresses. If they're a student athlete, they've got their studies and those sorts of things. So we need to take those into account. But they also have sports training 2, 3, 4, 5 times per week. They've got S&C stuff on top. They've probably got fixtures at the weekend. If they're a good student athlete, they might have fixtures on a Wednesday and on a Saturday. So you just change things ever so slightly to take into account the physical stresses. And then it's just sometimes managing the expectations a little bit in terms of the gym work. So like I said, with an everyday person, I'm delivering all of their physical activity most of the time. They might go for a 5K run at the weekend and that's it. The rest of their activities coming from the gym. With athletes, because they have seasons, they've got fixtures and all that sort of stuff, it's changing expectations that when we're in season, we're maybe not looking to become the ultimate strength power athlete at that period of time. We're just trying to manage some drop off through the season. That's a different kind of mindset to manage. And then when it's off season, it's like, okay, we haven't got these fixtures to worry about, so we can push the gym kind of a little bit harder and go from it at that point. So the everyday person doesn't need that kind of peaking cycle, but the athlete really does.
Yeah. And one of my favorite, my favorite content you do is sort of debunking some of these sort of fads and these really complicated sort of strength programs, conditioning programs that come out there. And I feel like a lot of your messages are around simplifying S&C and simplifying exercise. Because so someone from like my point of view, where I used to go to the gym more, sort of that not able to go so much anymore. So trying to get back into it can look quite overwhelming. Like, okay, what should I be doing? There's all of these like really complicated different styles out there. And I feel like what you do on your Instagram especially is kind of simplify things. So is that kind of a conscious effort to, again, try and increase that physical activity? Or do you just generally think it's not as sort of complicated as some of these people trying to make out?
Yeah, it's a little bit of reducing the barrier, make it seem simpler, so it's just easier to get started. And I just think it's more effective anyway. Like the terminology you'll talk about in S&C is you've got general physical preparation, so building a very general athletic base, strength, power, bit of muscle, those sorts of things. Then you've got specific physical preparation, which is maybe a little bit more relative to the specific sport that the athletes play in. So if you're a football player, for example, and we're talking about conditioning, it's like, right, so how many sprints are they actually going to be doing per game? How much distance are they covering? How can we build them up to that point and maybe just a touch more in their training so that when they're on the pitch, they've got fitness and then some in the bag to move on. And then you've got peaking cycles and things like that, where you use all of the qualities that you built, take away fatigue that you've built up, and then somebody's at kind of like their peak athletic performance going into whatever kind of competition it is. And I think that the nature of social media these days is that the algorithm will support things that look fancy, they look flashy, and that's kind of maybe the top end of that specific preparation sort of phase of training that you'd go through. But most people look into it for inspiration probably haven't done the general phase just yet. And to be honest, when we're talking about gym stuff, the biggest return you're going to get is getting stronger, getting fitter, building a bit of muscle, because that means you've got more potential to be stronger further down the line because you've got more muscle to use. That's all really general qualities. It's so far away, so far removed from what you do on the pitch or the court, what it is you play, that if you get too specific with it, you get too far away from building strength in the first place. So the general stuff is pretty much always the most effective, especially with young athletes who've got relatively young training ages in the gym.
Yeah. Okay. And then when we're looking at, so when I'm having these conversations with a lot of athletes around, they student athletes, so they've got lots and lots of commitments, like they don't have much free time. And then, like you say, they've got those extra bits that they've got to do. So, like you said, the things that don't necessarily pay the bills, not like developing technically and tactically or whatever they're doing in their training, but doing an S&C session, doing some mobility stuff, doing some stretching, rolling, and all that kind of stuff. And they really struggle sometimes with, like actually getting around doing that, and they always think, okay, I'll do it later on. So what would your sort of tips be to those people listening that might be listen to this thinking, yeah, that's me, I love training, or I really enjoy training, competing, but those little extra bits I just can't be bothered with. I always kind of push them off, and sometimes that means I don't get around to doing them. Like what's some sort of kind of 2 or 3 tips that you'd provide to those people to help with that?
I think first and foremost, and I don't know how well this would kind of sit with the sports psychology work that you do, but some of it that the athlete just needs to want to do the work in the first place. Pretty much kind of every kind of successful athlete that they would look up to in their sport will have probably done a little bit more than everybody else very often. It's maybe not going to be huge amounts of extra stuff every single day, but they'll consistently be doing a little bit more. And the only way you're going to do that is to really want to do the work. And some of that comes from just being really clear on what your goal is at the end. So having a really clear goal of how far you want to kind of push within your sport. And then, things like, I don't know whether your athletes will have access to kind of mentoring schemes and things like that, but, maybe trying to contact some people that are, a couple of steps further down the line than you, and kind of being clear on what they've done to get to that point. Really helpful. A lot of the work that I'll do with clients that I have is that kind of clarity point. Once you've got clarity on what it is you want to achieve, then everything else before that becomes much more clear, and you can break it down into the smaller goals along the way. So if I want to achieve this big goal, I need to be this by this sort of date, this by this sort of date, those sorts of things, which is quite easy to do with gym stuff. It's relatively predictable. You've got to put some skin in the game. For my clients, that's sometimes as simple as paying some money and just saying, look, I've invested this money, so I'm going to turn up and start doing it. But again, for athletes, I think some of that is setting themselves those big goals, and a way to become accountable to that is to kind of share it with either teammates, people that you kind of talk to often, friends, family, those sorts of things. Like, look, this is what I'm trying to do. You've told them, it's like, right, as soon as you've told people that, it's like, right, I've got to start doing the actions to make sure I don't let down here. And then the final thing that I work on a lot with people is just the proactivity and organization side of things. And I imagine, I haven't worked with many kind of younger athletes recently, just kind of the one. But that organization thing is maybe something that a lot of people will develop later in life. And if you can get on top of that early doors, it's going to make your life a lot easier. So just simple things, just like having a clear schedule set out in front of you. So if you've got college or university lectures and those sorts of things, just make sure they're in your diary when you're going to be training, and do your sports sessions, those on top. And it's like, right, what opportunities have I got to put in a little bit of a stretch session, a lifting session, those sorts of things. Book them into the calendar and just check your calendar the night before as to what your following day looks like. And this is stuff that 30 and 40-year-olds fall down on, and they won't get their food shop in, and they won't have their nutrition sorted just because they haven't got the food shop sorted. But just that little bit of proactivity at the start goes a long way to just making the following day a little bit easier and a little bit clearer as to what your actual goals are for the day. What's the 3 to 5 things that you're going to tick off, and just get it done and doing it repeatedly.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So again, a lot of the conversations I have with athletes is increasing that accountability, the word you kind of talk about there. When they a college timetable, a training schedule, they're accountable, or that hopefully they're accountable to themselves. They want to be there and they want to get better at school, or they want to get better at their sport, but ultimately they're accountable to someone else, to their coach, to their teacher. Whereas these extra bits are sort of the unseen bits. So you're not accountable to anyone apart from yourself. So how do you increase that accountability? So like you say, there's things like scheduling and setting yourself clear goals. And like that one that I don't necessarily always telling people is that share it. Like you say, once you share it, it's in existence, speaking it to an existence. sort of thing. And I do reference you sometimes when I'm talking to athletes. I remember you talking around when I think it was a previous gym that you worked at, and you were kind of talking about how its opening hours compared to these 24-hour gyms, where a 24-hour gym, there's always later because it's always open, and then the end of the day comes and you can do it tomorrow, so you'll do it tomorrow, then you go through the same path tomorrow. Whereas if you kind of limit your time, if you kind of say, okay, no, this is when I'm going to do it, then there isn't always later, like that's when I'm going to do it, and this is what I'm going to achieve in that session. I think that kind of resonated with me, and something I talked to athletes about as well. So no, that's really good takeaway messages, I think. And then kind of looking on the next question, how does your work support an elite sport mentality? So I know you spoke about how you don't necessarily see the kind of psychological messages that I kind of see in some of your content, but how do you think by engaging in what you do, following some of the principles that you kind of preach, how does that help support an elite sport mentality, do you think?
The great thing about the gym stuff compared to a lot of sports stuff is that it's very predictable. It's kind of you in the gym with some weights, ideally with a coach who is kind of organizing things for you, giving you a clear structure to follow. When you're on the pitch or whatever, you could be having the game of your life, but if you've got 10 other teammates that aren't, you could maybe not get the result that you want at the end. That's rarely the case in the gym. It's a very controlled sort of environment. It's very predictable. So there's always something that you can work on, and there's always something that you can work on positively and get a win from. There's always a win to be had in the gym, even if you're on a terrible kind of run of form in whatever fixtures that you play in. You could always turn up to the gym and get a positive outcome. Like I said before, there's always something that can be done, so it doesn't have to be this kind of all or nothing mindset. I really like what you said earlier about just getting to the gym in the first place and what's the minimum that we can do to get a positive outcome. That's a really good thing, especially if you are kind of in an injury sort of environment, or you've just got this kind of massive congestion of fixtures and competition and all those sorts of things. There's always something that you can do. Like I said before, the imperfect actions and stuff. But the other thing that you can do with it, and I find really helpful with the people that I work with, is just gradually building confidence in what it is that you are doing and earning the results. So you can maybe say that somebody at some point can lift 50 kilos and they could never imagine themselves doubling that and lifting 100 kilos. But for me as a coach, it's just quite easy, and I'll be able to see they definitely got the potential to do that. And it's very easy for me to plan out the roadmap for that person. And if somebody can then just follow that roadmap, execute just the really logical steps, and the gym, like I said, it's very, very logical to do, just follow those logical steps and get to that point. That's a massive confidence building thing for those people. And when I've worked with kind of strength sport athletes, so powerlifters, weightlifters who are lifting very heavy weights with a risk attached to it because it's kind of maximal effort sort of thing for one repetition. They're doing it in a competitive sort of environment and it's uncomfortable. So you're doing a lot of very hard, very heavy sets week in, week out. It's just building confidence that last week you did this, which tells me that this week there's no reason that you can't do this. It's going to be harder. It's going to feel heavier, but I totally believe that you can do it. If you as a coach can show that to that person over and over and over and over, you're building confidence, you're building trust. And I can definitely do that. Like, I can see that this is something that's totally achievable. And the other real positive thing about that is that the gym has kind of there's no free lunches in the weight rooms. So everything that you do get out of it and every bit of confidence that you've built and every lift that you achieve, you've had to earn it. You can't kind of skip a part of the process. You always have to build through. So that building that confidence in yourself, but also the process that it is going to work and it is going to kind of relate to something positive at the end. I think that's really helpful for anybody, but particularly for athletes as well.
Yeah, amazing. And then final question then. So I always kind of like to have, I know we've spoken about lots of different things, but one takeaway from this. So what takeaway or activity would you recommend for any athlete listening to this that they could go away and that could improve their motivation with regards to their gym sessions with their S&C, their mobility and all that kind of stuff?
Narrowing it down to one is quite hard. So it might sound like a couple as I kind of go through.
That's fine.
I've waited for this, but the first thing is just commit. Just commit to a short period of time. Especially if you're new to it, it's not going to take long for you to see like a real positive benefit out of it. So commit to 6 weeks, commit to 8 weeks, and just turn up for a couple of sessions per week. It doesn't have to be crazy, and just repeat the same stuff. Doesn't need to be anything fancy every single session. Commit to 6 to 8 weeks, repeat it, and just track your workouts. If you do nothing more than that, you'll probably have a pretty good 6 to 8 weeks, because you'll turn up to the gym. Every time you turn up, you'll be a little bit more skilled at what you did because you practiced it. You'll be a little bit clearer on what you can do. So last week I did 50 kilos for 5 reps. I'm going to try 52. I reckon I can probably do it. And because you've tracked it, you know that's what you did last week. You know that it felt doable, and you can go again, and just repeat that for 6 to 8 weeks. And just that initial commitment, most people, once they've got through that kind of first couple of months, they start to see the benefit. They start to feel the rewards from it. And that's where that kind of snowball just maybe starts to get rolling. And to be honest, most people that I will work with, even if they don't feel like they're going to enjoy it at the start, they do get to a point of really enjoying it. And then it becomes this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy of just like, I'm invested in this, I enjoy it, I want to turn up. It makes it easier to commit to it, easier to find that time in your schedule to do it. And yeah, that's where the snowball starts.
Yeah, there's a saying, competence leads to confidence. So like I say, when you start getting good at something and you feel more confident, you're going to want to do it more. So yeah, that's a really good kind of takeaway message, I think. And then finally then, just because like I say, I've kind of sang praises about it more than you have, but the content that you produce on your socials is really good and some really positive messages on there. So can you just let people know where they can find you on socials so they can engage and see some of this content?
Yeah, absolutely. So everything for me is at Coach Ian Wood. So whether it's website, Coach Ian Wood, whether it's Instagram, whether it's Facebook, it's all Coach Ian Wood, and that's where you'll find me. Perfect.
Well, thanks so much for joining me today, mate. It's been really good and some brilliant messages. And the crossover doesn't always seem obvious between our two worlds, but there's definitely a massive link there. So thank you for coming on and sharing some of your messages.
Yeah, no worries, mate. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So thanks for joining us on the Elite Sport Mentality podcast with me, Tom Evans.